Alexa, pause. I'm having an issue with making an intro because it's been 3 months since I've done a video. I don't know if this is a good idea, and if not, we're gonna do a video some other time, but we're gonna give it the old try and see how that works. Here's to 2020 not ending fast enough. What's up, guys? So how have you guys been? I know the quarantine has been pretty crazy. Everyone's been locked into their houses or fighting if they have to wear a mask or not wear a mask. The whole world is in an uproar. So let's make a video completely unrelated to any of that. As you can see, I don't have makeup on my face right now, as I can see it as well. Sorry about it. So that means we're gonna do a type of get ready with me, but as you see from the title, we're going to get into some true crime stories. So during this, well, really, since elementary school, I've been really into horror and true crime and really anything dark and disturbing. I've had a lot of free time during this quarantine, so I decided why not just make my YouTube channel into a crime and conspiracy channel instead of what I've been putting out. I want to create something for myself, things that I actually like doing. So this is one of them. Today we're going to actually be talking about Texarkana Phantom, otherwise known as the town that dreaded sundown if you've seen the films or any of the documentaries. I do want to kind of give you guys a disclaimer on how these videos are going to go because I do want to make this kind of a regular thing. I already have a couple stories lined up that I'm already going to do for future videos, and I've worked really hard on this and I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. Alright, so with that, let's get into this video. Oh, another thing, I am going to be doing my makeup during this one, but I'm not going to be doing my makeup for everyone. It's just kind of something to do right now. So the crime is the Texarkana Phantom. The crimes happened in 1946 between the months of February and July. Now, Texarkana is a metropolitan area split in between Texas and Arkansas. A lot of people think that Texarkana is just one city, but it's actually one city split into two. I know that's kind of confusing, but one half resides in Texas's Bowie County and the other half resides in Arkansas's Miller County. Both of the counties share the same facilities, but they have different local governments. Some people even dub Texarkana as Little Chicago. It's where a lot of people would travel. It's a huge stop for travelers up until the 1940s for some reason. It was diverse, a massive wave of immigrants mixing from Irish, Italian, German, Jewish, Greek, African American. They all came in the 1920s. And due to different cultures clashing, crime was already at an all-time high. So when these events that I'm about to tell you took place, not a lot of people were surprised at first, but we'll get to that. On February 22nd, 1946, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry, I always want to say Larry just because I guess I have a speech impediment, I don't know, but Mary was 19 years old. They didn't really say too much about Mary, just that she was younger, she was married before, she was in the middle of getting a divorce, and she was a smaller girl, petite, as you would say, with brown hair and brown eyes. So Mary was this 19-year-old newly divorcee. James happened to also be a divorcee. He was 25, he's an insurance agent, and one night the couple decided that they were gonna go to a movie together. They went down an unmarked road known as Lover's Lane to have some privacy after their little date. And around 11:45 p.m., they noticed that someone was coming up to them with a flashlight. Now, Mary and James, they didn't really think anything of it. They just kind of thought it was a cop coming to tell them, you know, hey, you gotta get out of here. Nothing too serious. He came up to the window and he said, quote, "I don't want to kill you, fellow, so do what I say." They were told to get out of their car. Mary was pleading. She told them, hey, we don't have any money. She opened up her purse. She opened up James's wallet and says, hey, look, we don't have any money. If you're trying to rob us, we don't have anything. You got the wrong people. And the guy just basically kept telling her, you're lying, you're lying. He then ordered James to take off his pants. And after James obeyed, the guy bashed James on the head with his pistol. He bashed him hard enough that he actually caused 2 deep fractures in James's skull. The perp told the girl run, as if he was wanting to hunt her. And once he caught up with her, he asked her, why are you running? Mary told him, well, you told me to. He ended up calling her a liar and punching her in the face. He unfortunately sexually assaulted her with his pistol. And he would have killed her if James didn't manage to get up from being bashed in the head twice, was able to flag down a car. The headlights ended up scaring the perp, and he ended up running away. When Mary saw that the perp ran away, she ended up getting up and going to some of the nearby houses and just pleading for help. The one that she finally got to that answered the door for her ended up taking her to the hospital, where James would end up spending weeks healing. Early the next morning, Sheriff Bill Presley got a call about a couple being attacked on Lover's Lane the night before. 3 officers arrived to the scene, and when they interviewed Mary, Mary described the perp as having a white pillowcase with cutout eyes and a cutout mouth and a cop-like flashlight. James's pants happened to be found 100 yards from the crime scene, but his wallet and belongings seemed to be all there. Everything was accounted for. So a robbery was out of the question. It just seemed like a vicious attack at this point, which, I mean, it kind of was. So, whenever they were interviewed, the only thing that James and Mary seemed to have in common in their stories is that the man was tall. Mary stated that the man had more features of an African-American man, and then James stated that he had more features of a white man. James also said that he had a vague recollection of what happened, since pretty much the entire time he was either blinded by the flashlight or he was knocked out. James knew one thing for sure, and that was that the guy was really freaking pissed. He said, quote, "I know he's crazy. The crazy things he said made me feel like his mind was warped," end quote. Both Mary and James stated that the man had to be at least 6 foot to 6'2". The inconsistencies with their stories led Sheriff Presley to believe that they might have known who their attacker was, that they were trying to confuse the police so that the attacker was protected. Freaking crazy. They would go on to believe that the attacker could have been Mary's ex-husband at the time, but he was able to provide a reasonable alibi, so he was out of the question. Soon the police were losing interest in the stories just because of the inconsistency that both James and Mary had, so they didn't bother to detain anyone for questioning. Mary actually ended up moving to Oklahoma. Mary ended up moving to Oklahoma with her aunt, and would still be so scared that she would not go to the upstairs by herself, and she would not sleep in the dark alone by herself. She would later go to say, quote, "I know his voice anywhere. It rings always in my ears. Why didn't he kill me too? He killed so many others," end quote. So later on, March 24th, 1946, around 8:30 or 9 in the morning, a motorist was driving down Rich Road, aka Lover's Lane, and noticed a 1941 Oldsmobile on the side of the road. As he approached the vehicle, he noticed that there was 2 people in there that appeared to be sleeping. However, as he got closer, it quickly became apparent that something horrific happened there. The 2 bodies were later identified as Polly Ann Moore and Richard Griffin. Polly Ann Moore was a 17-year-old high school graduate. She was born on November 10th, 1912. 28 in Atlanta, Texas. She actually graduated the year prior at age 16, and since graduating, she worked for Red River Arsenal as a checker. She lived with her cousin in a nearby boarding house, and while living there, she began to date an older man, Griffin. So Griffin, this guy, he is a 29-year-old veteran. You heard that right. He's 29 years old. She's 17. She's 17, he's 29. Anyway, he grew up in Linden, Texas, and fought for World War II. He was in the Navy until December of 1945 when he moved back to Texas. When he returned home, he resumed his work as a carpenter and a painter. And he began seeing Polly. So they were dating about a month and a half. So one night of March 24th, 1946, the couple decided to go on a double date with Griffin's sister. They ended up dropping off the other couple around 10 p.m. And then they went to a park, a little secluded park, to be alone. We've heard this one before, ladies and gentlemen. So the following morning, Richard was found on his knees in between his front seats of his car, with his pockets inside out and his head resting on his hands in front of him, as if he was asleep or taking a nap. Polly was found in the back seat with her purse looking like it had been gone through, her pockets also turned inside out, and she was just laying face down in the back seat of the car. Sheriff Presley called in Texas Chief of Police Jack Reynolds to identify the type of gun that was used to kill these poor teenagers. Well, one's not really a teenager. Two youngins. Anyway, they were sent to the lab and concluded both of the victims were actually killed with a .32 caliber pistol, executioner style. There happened to be a pool of blood in the dirt about 20 feet away from the car, and both Presley and Reynolds believed that the victims were actually shot outside of the car and posed in the car post-death. So this time, the killings caught a lot more attention from the town. 3 days after the crime happened, at least 50 people were questioned about the murders, and at least 100 false leads were investigated. And although there was a thorough investigation going on, there was nothing that could reveal who the killer was. And they didn't really have much to go by because forensic science at the time was pretty much non-existent. And they wouldn't have any more new evidence up until 3 weeks later when the next attack happened. So Bessie Brown woke up on the morning of April 14th, 1946 to see that her 15-year-old daughter, Betty, was not in her bed. The night before, Betty was supposed to go to the local VFW to play saxophone, and usually will return later that night, or she would drop off her saxophone before going to a friend's house, so she didn't have to carry the thing around throughout the entire town. Betty's mom, Bessie, thought it was really odd considering she didn't leave her saxophone and she wasn't home, so where could she have gone? The stepfather, Clark Brown, he assured Bessie that everything was fine, that she just probably took her saxophone over to a friend's house and she was staying the night there. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it, Bessie. Betty's okay. Mother's intuition, she knows. She told Clark, no, I don't really think something good is going on. We need to further investigate this, see what's happening. My daughter's not okay, and I know this. He's like, okay, Bessie, okay. Let me call her friend's mom. Let me see what's going on. Because usually she'd stay over at her friend's house. So he's like, let me call the mom. So Clark calls the mom. And the mom tells Clark, no, Betty never made it over here. That same morning, a body was found on North Park Road at about 6 a.m. The body was identified as 16-year-old Paul Martin. Okay, so Martin was found laying on his left side, wearing a light-covered long sleeve, with his arms kind of in front of him, like he was laying on his side, like you would if you were sleeping. He had 4 gunshot wounds. He had one in the back of the neck, his shoulder, his right hand, and one in the face. There is pictures of that one. I'm not going to show it. You can look in the description. There was a trail of blood across the road indicating that he was trying to crawl away before he eventually passed away. When the officers arrived at the scene, they found Paul's coupe, his car, abandoned, a mile away with the keys still in the ignition. Around the same area, Sheriff Presley also found Paul's little black date book, which he, for some reason, and it's actually kind of a good thing that he did, because we'll get to that later in the video. I have theories. He puts the black book in his pocket. After only 21 days since the last murder of Griffin and Moore, Presley decided that he needed more help in this investigation, so he brought in an FBI team. Shortly after bringing the FBI into the investigation, gossip started to spread the streets of Texarkana. Soon, Presley heard word through gossip throughout the town that Martin was actually the last person to see Betty Jo Booker alive, which soon became something that could have been a possibility considering Booker's body was found about 1.5 miles away from Martin's. And it was also later said that they were both spotted at the VFW and leaving together at around 1 a.m. Betty Jo was found lying on her back with her right hand tucked inside of her pocket, throwing things. She was shot twice, once in the face, which the bullet passed through her cheek and out of her nose, and once in the chest, which hit her heart instantly. 32 caliber shells were found at the scene, so, you know. On April 20th, while examining Betty Jo's body, they did conclude that she was sexually assaulted as well. At this point, members of the community started freaking out. It was after this murder that the attacker was officially known as the Phantom Killer. After an article was printed that gave the name the Phantom Killer, the lead investigator on the case, Tillman Johnson, stated, quote, "We were constantly getting calls, mostly at night, about prowlers. People call about any noise at all," end quote. So Virgil, age 37, and Katie Starks, age 36, were farmers who have been married for at least 14 years. On May 3rd, 1946, they were settling down after a long night on the farm. Virgil was sat in his front room with his curtains open and a heating pad resting on his lower back. Kate was in the other room when she heard something fall and break in the living room. When she left the bedroom to check on things, she found her husband Virgil slumped down in his chair with blood rushing down his neck. It gets gruesome, people. It gets gruesome. So Virgil was shot twice, once in the back of the head and once in the lower back, which actually short-circuited the heating pad that he was using. Kate ran to the phone, but before she could get to it, the assailant shot her. He shot her twice, both in the face. This lady's she's a bad bitch. What I'm about to tell you, whoa. So Kate was shot twice in the face. One of the shots grazed her nose and part of her ear. The other shot flew through her cheek, brushed through her teeth, and lodged in her tongue. So Kate, of course, dropped to the floor, and she was trying to crawl to the bathroom to search for Virgil's firearm that they had in the house. However, before she could find the firearm, the attacker was already trying to break down the door. Kate managed to get up and run out the opposite door, and thankfully to a neighbor who took her to the hospital. Virgil, unfortunately, did not make it. Kate did. The crime scene was so gruesome, but it was enough evidence to at least give the police a kind of a lead. There was a ton of fingerprints, and there was a mark of a size 10 shoe outside of the window where Virgil was shot. There were speculations that the Phantom Killer wasn't behind this same killing because there were certain aspects of the killing that didn't really fit the MO of the Phantom Killer. The weapon used in this attack wasn't the usual weapon that the Phantom Killer would usually use, but that really doesn't mean that he couldn't have switched up his weapons. I mean, but it's still a factor. The other aspect of it is that these victims were a little bit older than his usual victims, and they were married, and they had a house. Usually his victims were much younger, not established in the community, young lover type victims. After word spread about this attack, everyone was shook. Everyone pretty much locked themselves in their houses after dark. Investigator Johnson would go on to say, quote, "People would stand out in front of their homes and yell at you to identify yourself before you got too close. You had to identify yourself or you would get shot," end quote. 2 months later, the phantom's appearance seemed to decrease and life slowly started to become normal again. No one was ever found guilty of the murders. There are a couple suspects and theories that I have doing research for this one. One of them was a man named H.B. Duty Tennyson. So Tennyson confessed to some of the killings in a note left behind from his suicide. The note said, quote, "Why did I take my own life? Well, when you commit 2 double murders, you would too. Yes, I did kill Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin in the city park that night, and killed Mr. Stark and tried to get Mrs. Stark." According to Tennyson's cousin, Dr. John Tennyson, who is a forensic psychiatrist, he stated that Tennyson had connections to all of the victims. He was an usher at the theater that all of the victims attended to. He was in the same high school and attended band with Betty Jo Booker, and his friend lived under the same roof as Katie Stark's sister. And that's kind of weird, right? There was another person of interest, I would say. This was Yuelle Lee Swinney. Yuelle Lee Swinney was 29 years old. So during the attacks, cars were being reported stolen and later found abandoned wherever the killer was. So on June 28th, 1946, investigators went to stake out a downtown parking lot where a stolen car happened to be abandoned. This investigation led to the arrest of Yuelle's wife, 21-year-old Peggy Sweeney. While in custody, Peggy had no problem telling officers about all the horrific things that her husband had done. She just gave them up. She actually ended up telling them information that only a few people in the investigation would know about, and I'll get to that in a second. So on July 23rd, she made a statement that on April 13th, the day before the bodies of Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin were found, she said that her and Yuelle parked at Spring Lake Park to have a few beers. She said that while they were out there, Yuelle decided that he was going to leave the car and, quote, take a leak. And she said that he was gone from the car for about an hour. That's a long leak. While he was gone, she said that she heard something that sounded like 2 gunshots. And by the time he got back to the car, it was daylight. He approached the car in a rush sense and drove away pretty fast. Peggy stated, quote, "When he got back to the car, I saw that his clothes were wet up into his knees and damp up into his waist." And Peggy didn't stop there. Oh, no, no, no. On July 24th, the next day, she decided to change up her story. I don't know. She made another statement saying that Yuelle said that he was, quote, going to the park to rob someone. And she said that this time she went to Paul Martin's car with Yuelle. She even said that she watched Yuelle point the gun at the couple. Peggy stated during the event that she refused to search the teenagers while he was holding the gun to them, telling them to get out of the car. And that made Yuelle super pissed. That's allegedly when he shot Paul twice and made Peggy watch Betty so he can go get the car. When he got back to Betty and Peggy, he made them both get into the car, and then he drove deep into the woods where he would make Peggy stay in the car and took Betty Jo out to the woods to, quote, get some. When Betty ended up refusing, he stated that he shot her in the head. So Peggy had multiple stories of the same attack. It was all very confusing, but Peggy mentioned that she knew about Paul's date book and that she knew that it was thrown out into the bushes, which at the time, the only person to know about this date book was Sheriff Presley, who during the investigation, if you remember, he stuck the date book in his pocket. Yuelle was later arrested at Arkansas Motor Coach bus station while coming back from Atlanta, where he was attempting to sell, you guessed it, a stolen car. Not surprisingly, he did not want to talk to investigators like Peggy was so willing to do. But although Peggy was talking to investigators, she couldn't be forced to testify against her husband. And ironically enough, she couldn't be forced to testify against her husband because They were married literally hours before she was arrested on June 28th. Yuelle was then sent to Little Rock to get a truth serum. I didn't know that was a real thing. I don't think it's a real thing. It's probably placebo. So when they gave him this truth serum shot, apparently it was too high of a dose. I don't know what exactly it could have been, but he ended up passing out. Tillman Johnson stated, quote, "I think if we just kept him there in Texarkana, kept questioning him, we would have gotten the truth out of him eventually," end quote. Peggy was imprisoned, but eventually released. Yuelle was sentenced to life in prison for the Grand Theft Auto charge, but ended up being released on parole in 1973. He ended up dying in a nursing home in Dallas in 1994. Even though Yuelle did end up arrested, and there is reason to believe that he could have been the Phantom Killer, the case of the Texarkana Phantom is still unsolved. No one was charged for the attacks on these 8 victims. Alright guys, I know it was kind of some tough stuff there to talk about, but we did it. I hope you guys feel more informed, educated about crime. This one I thought was very interesting because it did have so many horrific crimes and still not a person was caught and charged for these crimes. So I thought that was a pretty interesting one to start this, hopefully a series if I can get it working, you know. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, hit that notification bell, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.